Hello everyone, and welcome to Over a Brew. In today's episode, we're going to explore the topic of digital wellbeing and specifically how further education colleges are facing and reacting to discriminatory behaviours being carried out by learners using digital media. I am joined over Teams by Angharad Roberts. Angharad is the Director of Bilingual Development, Skills and Learning Resources at Grwp Llandrillo Menai. Having previously taught A-level psychology, Angharad has had a storied career at the college. Having started out as a skill iaith tutor, she progressed to the strategic lead of bilingualism and equality within the group, and more recently, her role has evolved to include centralising the college's skills provision and learning resources. Angharad is a keen advocate for digital technology, using applications and platforms in both her personal and professional life, maximising tools like smart assistants and shared calendars to keep life on track. In her directorship role, Angharad is passionate about the Welsh language and embraces technologies that evolve, support and enable Welsh language development in the college's academic and social settings, demonstrating the positives technologies bring into college life at Grwp Llandrillo Menai and further education. We're going to pick up the conversation as we discuss how technology has also facilitated unsavoury activity around college life, but simultaneously how it may hold some of the solutions to resolve these occurrences.
A key word that you mentioned a couple of times there was facilitate, and how technology is able to facilitate language. I know when we've spoken previously, you've talked about in your directorship role that you, at time to time, will appear on things like disciplinary and investigative panels when you're having to look at some of the actions that our young learners have engaged in and maybe we don't necessarily want to see them engaging with. Can you talk to me a little bit about some of those experiences, but also how technology might have played a part in facilitating your intervention, but also their sort of perpetuation of what in some instances were criminal acts?
Yeah, so I would be involved in those processes because I've got strategic responsibility for equality in the group. And so mostly I'd be involved if the incident involves some kind of discrimination or is in breach or, would break the Equality Act. So there's something against somebody with a protected characteristic. And I'm brought in to support colleagues in terms of the decisions that they're making and looking at understanding, I suppose, what's happening. So we also have a new facility this year called Speak Up, where people can report any kind of discrimination, and it's open to staff and learners. And it could be, something small, or I suppose discrimination in itself is not small, but I suppose you're looking at a scale. So on one end, it could be a poster, or, there's something visible or something to do around accessibility or something. And then on the other end, there are incidents of discrimination from individuals towards another individual. And we have had a range of things have come up. We've had a number of racist incidents, homophobic, transphobic. We've had incidents of discrimination against individuals with a disability. And I think it's important when I'm talking about this, because when we've spoken previously, you've mentioned that these are types of things that you've seen in your college as well. And speaking more widely with other colleagues, I've understood that this is something that every college is facing. So I think it has been a challenge. We've had incidents where learners have, they've shown or used hate symbols, or they've used language that is just completely not acceptable in any way, either verbally or they've written it down so that the people have seen or heard them. And what we've found is that group chat facilities, so you asked me about the digital aspect of it. So group chat facilities has actually been something that supported or reinforced some of that discriminatory behaviour, as well as the immaturity of it. So I think we've seen quite a lot of immaturity from some of our learners around these areas, which I suppose a common word you might hear, we're talking about this stuff, is the word banter. particularly when we're talking about bullying and that kind of thing. So I think the group chat facility, things like Snapchat, is a place where that banter can continue even after we might have picked it up as a college and we've started to take fairly formal action with those learners and their parents. So that's been a bit of a challenge, and trying to understand to help them, to support them to move away from those spaces so that they're not exposed to each other anymore in that way, particularly if you've got toxicity within a group. So if you're talking about a group of young males, for example, we have had an example like that, and parents are probably thinking, right, I need to keep my son away now. We need to kind of break down what's happening here. But it's difficult to do that if they're still engaging with each other in this kind of online group chat space. And then we've had another example where a learner had said something. It was a racist comment, and she'd said it on an individual level to her friend. And what happened in that instance was the friend broke her confidence, and she told some of the other peers in the group, and it turned that the whole thing blew up for this particular learner, and it turned into a bit of a situation where she was being hounded for the comments that she had made. So a group of them were going after her online, trying to get her to admit to what she'd said and to explain why she had said what she said. And it turned into a bit of a, where it was almost now all of these other learners were bullying this individual learner because of this one thing that she'd said. So I think there is a big risk of exacerbating particular situations or making something that could be dealt with fairly quickly and effectively. It turns into something that has to be dealt with in a very different way then, because it turns into something else. So those are some of the challenges I think we've faced in terms of how the digital space or the online space can infringe on these incidents that might happen in college.
I think it also proves to demonstrate as well that where our young people think that they're in a safe space, a protected space, that nothing can be shared from that space, that actually that's not the case, because ultimately we are dealing with people. It is the person who is dealing with the technology. It is the person who is responding to the messages, and inevitably it'll be the reaction of a person when they are upset about something that has happened. And we've had, I know, speaking with our campus service teams and our wellbeing and safeguarding teams, we've had similar examples where victims have come forward, and then through investigation it turns out they're perpetrators of initial or an inception point. And as you say, it evolves into something much different. And the reason for that is because these conversations are taking place in these online spaces, and they get blown up out of all proportion. And our young people don't always have those coping mechanisms to bring the conversation down or to move away from the conversation, which you're rightly advising is to step away from those platforms. In your sort of first example, you mentioned around working with parents as well. How supportive have you found parents in helping the college and their young people to sort of navigate some of these difficult situations?
Yeah, generally, I'd say parents have been really supportive. I'd say probably some of the examples that we've seen, we've had parents who've been really shocked by the involvement of their child in a particular incident or a series of things where they just weren't aware of it. I suppose the surprising thing for us as well is to understand the degree to which parents, that they often just don't have a clue what might be going on with their children and what's happening with them in those online spaces. We've had an example where a learner was part of a peer group, clearly wanted to be part of that peer group, but other members of the group had created an account online to mock this learner, and that was quite difficult to see the impact on the learner, kind of seeing the realization in real time for the particular learner, and sitting with them and their parents in terms of the realization that they were actually being bullied by their friends. And through that conversation, and this was through a disciplinary process that this had happened. So it was really sad, but also I suppose it's opened our eyes a bit to how much more we need to be doing to help them realize, to understand the impact of putting things out there, and the fact that once they're out there, they're still there. Because the particular account that I mentioned, it had been deleted very quickly, because obviously they were aware that we had become aware of it, but we were still able to find images of the account and images of the videos and the language used to describe some of the videos on there, which was, some of the language was homophobic, transphobic. There was discriminatory language in there. And that's there now, it's out there. So that's been a difficult lesson, for that particular instance. And it's something that I think you and I talked about this, we want to be able to prevent that as much as possible, don't we? We don't really want to be in a position where we're having to deal with it. So I think there is a wider conversation about educating young people more, not taking for granted that because they're quite good with technology, that they know what that means and the impact of it and the consequences of it. So yeah, there's just a huge amount of work to be done.
Oh, I agree. And I think with our, we're both involved in the GIST community of practice around digital wellbeing. And I know that with an action focus within that group on the horizon, the 3 topics that we're looking to address. One is how do we educate parents or support parent education? How do we support learners to deal with the variety of landscape that they are dealing with? And how do we then go and to work and upskill our colleagues and staff around dealing with some of the, for want of better terms, lower level incidents within, let's say, classroom environments, and just be more aware of what is going on in online digital spaces with our current crop of young learners. You mentioned earlier the word banter and how sometimes, learners will frame through naivety their experiences, and they will try to almost brush off these adverse experiences using some of these terms. What approaches have you found effective within Grwp Llandrillo Menai that help them to understand the real life impact of some of these behaviours where, as you said, they're using very damaging language, homophobia, racism, transphobia, that carries with them into the real world. So what have you found effective in helping them deal with and understand those behaviours?
Yeah, so I think with that, we have to accept that although you always want to look at kind of education and things, that depending on the degree of the incident, sanctions and disciplinary process does definitely have its place. And I think that for us, actually, that process, I could see that it was useful in helping learners realise the seriousness of what's happened. There's a point towards the start where they might be giggling or laughing when they're in a meeting with, initial meetings. And once they realise that they're going through that process, parents are becoming involved and things, the attitude of the learner changes. So I think that is something that is needed, but it's certainly not enough. It shouldn't happen on its own. So for us, we do put a big emphasis on education, so for the individuals, but also targeted for programme areas or a campus where we might have seen there to be a particular issue or, a trend. And we have seen those trends coming through from some programme areas more than others. We've had more incidents of speak up reports, for example, coming from and about construction and engineering learners, and then health and social care, sports, public services. For some reason, we've seen patterns there. So we've been able to look at the education and what kind of sessions can we bring in external companies and organisations to help with some of that as well. Some of it, if it's campus-based, it could be due to things starting in school and the behaviours happened there and it might have been ignored or not dealt with. So again, that campus-based thing where we can look at, can we do something for the whole campus here, for staff and for learners in terms of educating them? Restorative and trauma-informed processes we're using as well. I know this is something that all of the colleges are using. So we might bring individuals together for open and supported conversations to facilitate understanding what's happened, the different perspectives, the victim, the perpetrator, to try and facilitate a situation someone might be able to apologise and reconcile as well. So and I think the last one, although it's not something that's directly involved with the learner themselves, I think tracking how and when these incidents take place is something that's been new to us as an organisation this year through Speaker. It's allowed us to be able to find and see those patterns and to be able to make wider decisions about what does this look like for us moving forward now? Do we need to bring anything else in terms of how we deal with it? Or how we support learners to be able to be more respectful of each other, to be more understanding of each other. So I think that's important as well, is understanding when it's happening, how much is happening, and where.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken, I know I've spoken with colleagues as well about the societal impact of college life. So, we are a puzzle, if you like, of everything that's going on in our community, and each learner brings a piece of that puzzle to the college. But it sounds as if, highlighting consequences, taking a targeted approach to education to ensure that there is a realization of real world impact of some of these. I mean, if some of these behaviors existed out in community or perpetuated on community, all of a sudden there'd be very real consequences that we don't have control over. You mentioned some external parties that you bring in as well. Is there any groups that spring to mind or organisations spring to mind that have been particularly impactful here?
We've used No Boundaries from, I think they're Cardiff way actually. They've been fantastic. So they deliver some anti-racism training for learners. They are quite expensive, so that's the only thing in terms of making it something sustainable, because you can't pay £1,000 plus or something every time you want a session and we've got 5,500 full-time learners in the college. Ideally, would love to have all of them go through the training with No Boundaries, but that would be targeted specifically where we've seen more concerning behaviour or use of language or something from particular cohorts. But we are looking to now develop more stuff in-house as well. And where we're able to, I think the power of what No Boundaries were able to deliver were those personal stories, the lived experience. And sometimes I think internally that can be lacking. So our Speak Up facility and having these exact real life examples of what's happened in the college is giving us that lived experience without it having to be of the individual who's actually delivering a session, for example. So yeah, I think that's something we're looking at, but we would always continue to look to use external expertise as well, because that enriches what we do, where that's appropriate, where it's affordable for us. And yeah, Dan, if you know of some organisations that might offer some things for free as well, that would be fantastic.
Well, I know, for example, that so this week I was on a call with a group called Minus Violence, and that was organised by Cardiff City Council. That was a free CPD session for us to go on to, but I dare say there's a cost factor to any continued engagement. But they provided a very powerful experience when it came to demonstrating how some of the attitudes are perpetuated that we see in our young people, but how that exists in mainstream media, how it exists in gaming platforms, some of the online forums that they might be experiencing and finding their way into, just in some instances where they're seeking advice on a particular topic in their fledgling life, but they find themselves down a rabbit hole. But Minus Violence provided a very powerful experience. The facilitator, I think, was Raymond Douglas, and he was very engaging from the start, in fact. And I think he probably could have spoke for longer than the hour and a half that we had and would have still kept the audience on board. So with that in mind, I mean, I know you're an active participant on the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion group for colleges in Wales. Do you have any thoughts on some of the changes that you would like to see? If you had a magic wand now and you could say, right, in educational institutions and our approach to, let's say, digital citizenship and online behaviour, what would be a sort of utopic intervention or systemic change that you would like to see that would have a real impact for our young learners?
Yeah, that's a great question. But yeah, and I think it is wider than just digital and online, because any work we do in this area absolutely does need to explicitly address digital and online. As we've talked about, how this space can actually exacerbate that behaviour. You know, we've talked or reinforce the types of behaviour that are just unacceptable, discriminatory, and disrespectful. There is actually a national group in the sector looking at this at the moment. In particular, we're interested in being able to better understand and support boys. Because I think, you know, you've touched on it a little bit during the conversation, and some of the examples that I've given were of incidents where, you know, they were young boys who were part of those incidents. So the stories that we're hearing suggest that there is something going on with boys. I think when we last spoke, you mentioned the Lost Boys report.
Yeah, the Centre of Social Justice released that this year. Yeah.
Yes. And I had a look at that actually, and the CEO had written something in the report which resonated with me in terms of what this might mean in this area. So he wrote something like strength, resilience, responsibility. These are not traits to be suppressed, but harnessed for good. So it's about supporting them to look at those positive aspects of what they're looking for, in particular as to their own identities. So the idea from the national group at the moment, what we're looking at, it's the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion group. It's chaired by the amazing Viv Buckley, who's the principal of Brew College. She's just fantastic. She is just a beacon, and I think that the group has really developed now to be an action group. So we're talking about developing some kind of awareness course. So the comparison has been to speed awareness. So where things are starting to bubble, where you're starting to see things that might be a little bit more concerning from learners in general, it would be available to all learners, and it would support them with being respectful. So I think the main aim of it is around respect. They're playing with names and things at the moment, but they're looking at something that would initially build awareness of issues. So educate, to learn about the impact on other people, the impact of these behaviours on other people, and then learning to learn. So understanding how to navigate the issues. Do they know that what they're reading is accurate, is factually correct? Where is this evidence coming from? And then lastly, to be reflecting and to be creating some kind of action plan to help them to think about moving forward. How will they develop this further? So I know you said utopian, but I think we're actually looking at making it a real life solution for the sector. And I'm not saying that in itself will be enough, but I think it definitely will help to move us in the right direction. So I'm quite excited about that development. And to see how that comes to fruition.
I love that. And I think we talk, I know I mentioned the term utopic, but we are talking about reality at the moment. I think the debate is constantly between that we consider reality in terms of being in everyday life, and what our young people consider reality, which is probably leaning more towards their online spaces. You know, they're engaging those more and more. They're being absorbed in those more and more. So I think any intervention that starts to just clear the boundaries a little bit and bring them a little bit back towards understanding the implications of their behaviours on other people and just being self-aware of what goes on around them, I think is really important. And it sounds as if the EDI group is really about to hit the nail on the head there with an intervention that could be powerful for the entire sector. And I know you give Viv then a really big praise, and I know you're a bit of a champion for self-belief and female professionals. So just to wrap things up, considering our practitioners and looking at educators across the FE sector, this can often be a very challenging experience where, because of where us as adults have maybe come from, we don't always have the insight that would be required to effectively deal with things, and we require some support mechanisms. But what advice would you give them, or would you offer to educators around dealing with this intersection around technology and inclusion, and trying to clear up some of these boundaries and challenging behaviours?
Okay. I would say that one of the main things I've learned is to listen, to try and understand and be open to different perspectives. So that's been a challenge for me, actually, to take that step back and think, where is this person coming from with what they're saying? So I think it's about listening, understanding, being open, and not making assumptions. But on the other hand, I think it is really important then to be clear on the boundaries and not to be afraid to challenge where necessary, and taking that appropriate action to be able to tackle inappropriate discriminatory behaviour, obviously. So I think there's kind of those two sides to it, around being open, wanting to listen, but not being scared of challenging and taking clear action in order to make clear we do have boundaries and there are things we won't accept. But there's always going to be that support and that help there to help people to improve. And I think the most important thing at the end of the day is to be kind, isn't it?
100%. And I think on that, though, I think that's a beautiful point to sort of wrap things up. And Angharad, it's genuinely been a pleasure having you on today and chatting with you. Wish you every success now in your continued evolution with your role and your work with young people. And thank you very much for your time today.
Diolch, Dan.
Diolch fawr.
Hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode and hearing Angharad speak so knowledgeably and passionately around the topics of equality, discrimination, and the digital perpetuation and resolution to some of these events. During the episode, Angharad and I discussed organisations that can enrich our messaging and support to learners. Since recording this episode, Ofcom and the UK government has strengthened the powers available under the UK Online Safety Act and the criminalisation of specific online behaviours and illegal harms. A positive outcome from this is the increased capacity of entities such as Tarion Regional, Cyber and Economic Crime Unit and the Cyber Engagement Officers from local forces. Their support is now available to educational organisations to promote safe and responsible use of technology in academic and everyday life. For more information, visit their link below.